Welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
Hope you guys are ready to rock. This is the Alpha Warrior Show. I'm your host, Alpha. I got a solid Patriot for you guys today with an amazing parts are going to make you angry, heartfelt story of persecution and persecution from a government that's supposed to protect our country, in essence, protect us. But instead, they're persecuting the man that protected us and followed that oath. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Garret. Oh boy, you guys, Christian, husband, father, congressional whistleblower, indefinitely suspended FBI agent, former police officer, infantry, spit it out right there, of Iraq and Afghanistan. And something interesting that was in his profile was 1 Peter 2, verse 11. And on the King James Bible version of it, it reads, "Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul." And I was like, man, there's some powerful words in there. And I want to know why Garret picked it. So we will. But first, let's get to two quick sponsors, you guys. And first on deck, Goldco. Be prepared. It's easy. It's fast. Rich are buying gold. Last couple of days, if you've seen, gold and silver have been skyrocketing. If you subscribe to Rumorville, some people believe that that's an indication of an economic collapse. I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know. I'm not an economic expert, but I'm also not a dummy. And I can tell you that I don't trust Biden. I don't trust the current government that's in charge of our economy. I don't like the moves they're making. And unfortunately, a lot of countries, especially countries that are at our adversaries, are making moves that are really impacting the US dollar. So go and talk to the people that actually know what they're talking about. Go to alphalikesgold.com. Links are down in the description for everything that we talk about today and sponsors. And in a few short minutes, you can get a lot of information. And whether you do it with me and my partner, or you find another company, you guys have worked too hard for your money, for your retirement, your nest egg, that's for your spouse, your kids, the people that you're responsible for. Don't let the elite run off with it when they manipulate the markets the way they do. And then our next commercial and our last one for a little bit, because we're going to be doing commercials in the middle of the show now, you guys. You got to do it. Alpha's got to feed the family. But I'll see you guys in 60 seconds with my guests.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution, one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
You get a pillow, you get a sandal. Now I'm just playing. That's Oprah. I'm not a fan of Oprah. That's Mike Lindell. My pillow. My Patriots are my store as well. Promo code Alpha works at both of those, you guys. Let me bring on the Patriot you really want to hear from today. Garret, how you doing, brother?
Alpha, I'm alive, as they say, and well, I should add. I'm alive and well. And in part, I'm just going to get right into it. In part because of that verse you read to start us off. And I had kind of forgotten about that I had that verse posted. And as soon as you read it, it all came flooding back. And for those who don't know, I was well, I guess technically I still am an FBI employee. I was a special agent in the FBI. They told me I can no longer identify as that, but I could identify as a woman if I wanted, according to them, which makes no sense at all. But I was in the middle of transferring from the Kansas City division to the Quantico region in Virginia. We'd sold our house. We just had a baby. She was 2 weeks old. I show up on my first day. I get suspended, and we had not yet closed on our house in Virginia. So we essentially were rendered homeless. And for like the next 2 months, roughly, we sojourned. So in the KJV, that verse says in part, "I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims." And so another word for pilgrim, and it's used in other versions of the Bible, is sojourner. And there's some layers here for me because it really ties deeply to my faith in a lot of ways, because that verse later says, "Abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul." And one of my all-time favorite verses, other verses, comes in the book of First John chapter 2. It's like 15 through 17, and it talks about how we need to turn away from the things of this world because they're passing away. And though that includes the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the boastful pride of life. And so this is one of the things I love about the Bible, is it ratifies itself and verifies itself and repeats its holy ordinances and message throughout. And this is one of them that I came to learn firsthand, and probably in some ways I'm still learning firsthand. We literally became pilgrims and sojourners. And there's another verse that ties to it, Philippians 3:20. It says, "But our citizenship is in heaven." And so and there's more to that verse. That's the part I'm keying in on with this sojourning aspect. And so when I get suspended, I had traveled to Virginia alone. I was planning on going there, reporting to my new unit, and then traveling back to Wisconsin, which is where we're from. You could probably tell with my accent, and picking up the family and heading to Virginia to move into our new house. Well, in their wicked ways, the FBI maliciously suspended me to prevent us from doing that. And we'll get into it, I'm sure. But we later found out just this past November that the FBI did that intentionally. And a new whistleblower who I don't know came forward and said that they did that to financially devastate us and to screw us. But I have it on strong authority from someone very, very close to the matter that what the supervisor over my internal investigation actually said was, "We are going to F the mother effer." And so yeah. But anyways, back to that beginning time frame, as we're like in this sojourning mode with a brand new baby and 3 other little girls. We're living in an RV, my brother-in-law's RV for a time. And then, at one point we went and traveled down to Indiana where my brother lives. And as God's divine providence would have it, one of the days we were there, he was hosting the small group Bible study that he's a part of. And his message was on the sojourner. And boy, how relevant for me at the time that was. And so it's really stuck with me ever since then, and still does to this day. And I've learned along this road, and I'm sure I will continue to learn, that we truly are sojourners here, and we have to seek God's will and God's righteousness. Of course, I get it wrong. I sin every day. Don't get me twisted, but because I'm a sinner and I need a savior. That's why Christ came. That's why he died. That's why we celebrated Easter on Easter, or Resurrection Day on Easter, not some fake satanic trans visibility day of recognition or whatever. But that's my intro. Thanks for letting me run with it.
100%, man. That the people are here tonight to hear your story. They don't want to hear Alpha flap his lips unless it's like, ask a good question and dive into there. And there's men that I speak to, and them, you're friends with them, and I respect these guys a lot. When we talk about Steve, and we talk about Kyle and Aaron and so many others, and the one thing that they all say about you is the strength of your faith. And I wanted to start with that question because I want people to realize, listen, right now, our government sucks. It does. Our DOJ, it does. Our law enforcement's making a lot of mistakes. And the media is definitely putting the spotlight on the corruption and the bad stuff. But I also want to know people to realize, listen, there are men and women that have this kind of faith as well. And life ain't easy for them in there. But those are the ones we got to protect. We got to keep those kind of people behind the badge, because if we let the evil tyrannical government get their way, we're talking real life brown shirts is what they ultimately want to get to. And faith's important, man.
Yeah.
And especially in this journey you're in, that's not over yet, you
Yeah,
know.
for
And
sure.
and,
Yeah.
and that's probably the tough part, for a lot of us. It's like it's not. There's no date that says, "Hey, on this date, this is going to be over for you."
Right.
Like, you just wake up knowing I'm in the fight, and I
Exactly.
just got to fight today to make it till tomorrow.
Exactly right. And man, I'm certain. I am certain that you can relate to what I'm about to say here. So recently we had someone, a family friend, uh, contact us and basically say, essentially they said, "What are you guys doing?" Um, and I'm going to address this in a Substack post most likely, and I'm not going to put this person on blast. I'm going to reflect on this and pray about this and do it hopefully lovingly and graciously, but truthfully and boldly. This response, and they claim the same faith, they claim the same God, and then they look at me, and I'm sure they would look at someone like you and say, "What are you guys doing? You're barely getting by. You're barely scraping by. You need to take care of your family." And that's one aspect that's really difficult along this is you don't wake up, like you just said, you don't wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm one more day closer to the finish line." Yes, intuitively, we know that there will be an end someday. And think of it too, like some of these legal proceedings or whatever else, maybe there truly won't be some end, some finality on earth. We might die first. Who knows? We don't know. But to the people who in my life who claim to be friends and family, especially is where I struggle. They don't pay attention. I've got a Substack, I've got a podcast, I'm on Twitter. Like there's enough out there where you could easily follow along. The ACLJ, who is some of my powerful attorneys who are representing me, they send out notices, and all sorts of things. Like it's not difficult at this point to be like, "Oh, I wonder what's going on with Garret." So there are literal strangers in my life who will contact me on Twitter or whatever through the merch stores website, and who know more about what's going on in my life, who at least seem to care more about what's going on in my life than people who are allegedly friends and family. And so that is a struggle of mine. And I'm sure that sometimes, like, I take it too personally. I get too offended, or I get too angry, where it no longer is righteous anger and it slips into sinful anger. And like I part of me like wants to grab those people and shake them and say, you have no clue. You don't know. You clearly don't know what this is about, and also you clearly haven't seen how much our God loves justice, how much the God, the one true God, loves justice. The Bible is rife with these examples. And so yes, you're at 3+ years. I'm at just over 1.5, and the battle continues and it wages on. And this is another thing too. It's like this is I'm seeing more and more. I'm understanding the spiritual warfare, the spiritual battle that is taking place. And the enemy, they do not want you. They do not want me. They do not want Kyle or Steve or Tara or Aaron or Sonia or any of the suspendables. Steve Baker, George Hill, they don't want us speaking. The enemy wants to silence us. And that I'm speaking of the spiritual enemy, Satan and his minions too, is behind the scenes trying to thwart what is going on. But, and this is another thing that's interesting. Kyle's a Catholic. Aaron's a Orthodox Christian, I believe. Um, Me and Steve probably more like non-denominational. George is a Catholic. He was raised in the Catholic Church. I have heard Sonia talk about her faith before on a podcast. I don't, the denominations don't matter so much to me, but we all have this similar thread, this similar faith. And I'm sure, like you, and you do too. I've heard you mention your faith before as well. And I'm not saying everybody like in this fight has that same faith or same thread, but in my experience so far, most do. And in my personal experience, people will say to me and have said, "Oh, you're so courageous." No, I'm actually not. I really am not. I just am trying to do what God has commanded I do. And as an FBI agent, when you see things that are wrong, that the government is doing that are wrong and or illegal, I mean, we can just go right to the statute, 5 USC 2303. The 5 categories that are protected for you to make disclosures on to Congress and to a bunch of other places include overspending. They include abuse of authority. They include a violation of any law, rule, or regulation, and they include gross negligence. And there's one other I'm forgetting, something about like affecting the health of people. And in my instance, everything I brought forward, it was a gross abuse of authority, or I'm sorry, it was a gross mismanagement. It was an abuse of authority, and or it was a violation of law, rule, or regulation. Or at least I had a reasonable belief that those things were true. Congress has all the receipts. I get canceled for that under false pretenses as well. That's not me being courageous here. It's me looking to the Father and saying, I know what is right, and I have to do what is right. Otherwise, I will be guilty for my sins of omission here. I'm putting a bag and a gun on every day and faking the funk, really. Because I'm going to work and I see these things that are wrong and evil. And not only are they evil in God's sight, but they're also against our own law. So how can I say, I swear an oath to the Constitution again, because I did it twice in the Army. I did it once as a cop. I did it once as an FBI agent. That oath actually meant something. So when I came forward with protected disclosures, it meant something. It didn't, I knew what, well, I guess I didn't know entirely what was on the line. I had an idea of what was on the line, and I did it anyways. Doesn't make me courageous. It makes me stepping out in some degree in faith and saying, Lord, I know what's right. I know that this is right. You have put it on my heart to know what is right and to abide by your statutes, by your laws. And I need to step forward in faith. I need to trust you. Of course, my life has gone in a direction that I never could have imagined. And honestly, I never would have picked. I wouldn't have picked this. I was making about to make $130,000 a year as an FBI agent and have a pretty cool job where I would have been operating in even more of a covert capacity. And then I get thrust into the public sphere. I don't like having my face out there. I don't like having my name out there. But as part of this journey, we have to, because we have to keep telling the truth. And when people try to silence us, that's how you know they don't want to hear the truth.
100%, brother. One thing I agree with everything, but one thing you said that definitely sticks out in my mind. The last place I would have picked was being behind a microphone and a camera. As a matter of fact, if somebody would have brought that to my attention, I probably would have made fun of them.
Right.
Like, what's wrong with you? No, man. I'm going to be jumping fences and thrashing bodies. Like, I need to go fight evil.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
But something else you said that I thought was pretty significant in there, because I know it relates to me. I ain't a saint. Like,
right.
Everybody
Right.
just understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I don't wake up in the morning saying I'm going to be bad today. I do wake up, with the intentions of being the best version of myself that I can to make sure that I and my family and those I care about make it to heaven. Like, that's the ultimate goal of the day. But, I'm human, and sometimes I screw the pooch on that.
That's right.
But God knows my heart, and he knows my intentions. And I think people need to understand that God knowing your intentions is a really big deal. It's not an excuse for you.
That's right.
But also know that that's where mercy comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do the right thing, hopefully our maker will have some mercy, because I also believe he's a loving God. And remind me about dads and God sometime in the show if I forget to ask.
Okay.
It's something that was presented to me and I was like, this is pretty interesting, and I want to start asking people. But the other part, going back to the verses, and verse I like is the Isaiah 6:8.
Oh,
Who will I send? And it's like, send me. And it's I get goosebumps, man. I'm wearing a sweater, but if you can see it, I see goosebumps. And I know there's different versions of it, but essentially it's, who do I send? And it's you saying, send me. I'm going to be the one to go fight evil, to do what's right. And you mentioned it, this oath that we took, that it means something. And when as a cop and you put on that vest, that specific Velcro sound, like
Mhm.
right, you do that with the understanding that you may not go home that day.
Right.
Like when you walked out of the house, your wife, your kids, your parents, whoever you live with, that may be the last time they saw you, that may be the last conversation you had with them, but you're willing to do it because that's what this oath means. Because it's not just our country, it's the global awareness of good versus evil. And it's knowing that there's men and women in other countries doing the same thing, taking the fight to evil. And as long as evil knows that good is there, it doesn't get to have a free for all.
Right.
And for many of us, that sacrifice is worth it, even up into including, losing our life. And granted, there's a lot of other stuff. Of course, financial crimes are important and sexual assault crimes are important, but I'm just talking about the general essence of good versus evil. And when we get hired, I would at least like to think that when these agencies hire us and they do these extensive backgrounds, and the FBI, like,
Yeah.
gotta have a background check on that.
Right.
And you're picking the cream of the crop.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Hindsight is 2020 all the time.
Yep.
But then you start to wonder, is the system that they have designed to pick the employees looking for certain types of people that are going to eventually mold into what they want? And people like yourself and Kyle, they just judged it wrong. You were never going to mold. God
Right.
already molded you. You already had a mission. And now they're dealing with the ramifications of you can't affect the solid warrior. You can't. And now they're dealing with, hey, this man that we hired because of good ethics, honesty, courageousness, bravery, doing the right thing, a skill set to take on evil and thrash it and kill it when needs to be, but also the ability to show compassion and mercy. Like, oh, this one was real.
Yeah.
And now we're fighting the beast that we all even trained. It's just, how does that resonate with you, man?
I think this is a great theory. It's clear that you've thought about this to some degree, because I don't know that I've even thought about it this deeply, but I think you're absolutely right. I think they have, or are, their process is designed to find those who have certain traits and characteristics, but who will toe the line. It's basically been unwritten rule in the FBI forever, at least since Hoover's reign of terror, that you do not tarnish the FBI, even if the FBI is wrong. And it's like, well, that goes against my oath. That goes against the oath I made. And yes, you found the few who truly meant the oath. And I think, like you, similarly to you, Marine Corps guy, I was in the Army, Afghanistan, Iraq, infantry guy, then a cop, then FBI SWAT as well. Like, I wasn't joking when I made that oath. I wasn't joking when I was shooting at people in Afghanistan or when they were shooting at me. It was very real. And so this is part of our fabric. It's part of who we are. I know you've been in some OISs as well. I was in no OIS as a police officer, but plenty of use of force scenarios. And this is real. This is real. Romans 13, I think it's one of the most misinterpreted or purposefully distorted chapters of the Bible, at least since COVID era. It talks about government, and it talks about government restraining evil, and that they do not bear the sword in vain, but the government exists ordainedly. It's ordained by God to exist, to punish evil and lift up good. Our government, and most governments, if not all in the world, have flipped that on its head and have said, just simply comply. Well, then when you get the small group of people, and think of this too, Alpha, how we've all kind of merged and found each other. This is this is divine ordinance as well. God's sovereignty is real.
Dang, you gave me goosebumps, bro. I feel it, man. Keep
Yeah.
going.
This was always going to happen. It was always going to be this path. Before we were ever even born, any of us, God knew the path he had for us. And yeah, I struggle with that sometimes. Don't get me wrong, because in my flesh, again, back to that verse in First Peter you started with, in my flesh, I don't want this all the time. It's difficult. I'm still unpaid for many, many months now. The FBI is saying, no, you can't even go get a job. They're saying you can't even accept donations because we are going to claim wrongfully. I would say also this is defamatory. They have already claimed. Christopher Wray testified to this in July. So I testified in May. They brought him forth in July, and he was asked about me and Kyle and Marcus and about a give, send, go that raised a lot of money. It was supposed to be split between me and Marcus. And Christopher Wray testified that it would definitely be a violation of FBI policy for us to take that money, and possibly a violation of federal law, because he claimed that we were going to take, or we were taking that money because of or for our testimony. When in actuality, that give, send, go was started after our testimony. Like, nobody came to us and said, hey, if you say this, this, or this, we'll pay you. Like, these people are wicked, man. They're wicked.
It goes back to that original statement where they said, we are going to F this mother effer.
Yep.
And they knew that by getting someone, especially him, on the record to say that, it gives them the time and leverage to manipulate context, just to put you guys in a position to make you suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Like to make you suffer. Right. Because the one thing they know about, you men, and I'll throw myself in there as well. The one thing they know is you can put us through anything. You could turn up the heat as much as you want. We're not going to flinch. But they know the Achilles tendon or the Achilles heel to that is a man's family.
That's right.
When they put us in a position to see that this fight that we're taking, which is the right one, it's the one that God's put in front of us, but you also have to see your family suffer. People just don't understand the pain that comes with that.
Right. They don't. And yeah, I mean, another part of this is these kindred spirits like you, that God has connected us through divine ways again, because who would have ever imagined this, but our technology that we have, I mean, you're half a country away essentially. and there's two things you said here. So earlier you mentioned Isaiah 6:8. That was in my opening statement. Part of it, the here am I, send me part, was in my opening statement when I testified. I didn't know it at the time, but I later learned that has always been one that stood out to Kyle as well. He was just in Idaho a couple weeks ago, giving a speech, and somebody recorded it, and I listened to it, and he started with that as well. And I've studied this pretty deeply since I testified. Isaiah essentially was at a point where he was like looking around like, oh, there's nobody else. God's knocking on my door. I have to. There's nobody else. So here am I. Send me. Like, likely didn't want to, but knew he must. Knew he had to. Knew God was calling him. And I think that's why it resonates with us, because it's like, well, we know what's right here. And then the second thing, I also testified to this, how they've tried to crush me and my family. Go ahead and crush me, man. Go ahead. Throw me in the fiery furnace. I don't care. I don't. But not my family. And that is the thing that really pushes me forward, is like if it was just me, man, I probably would have resigned by now. I probably would have just going back to being a cop and probably living with some shame and some regret, and probably not even carrying the fight forward. But I actually think back to something my ASAC told me once. So in February of, let's see,
and tell everybody what an ASAC is real quick, just so.
Yeah. So in the FBI, in the rank structure, I was an SA, a special agent. Above that is an SSA, a supervisory special agent. Above that is an ASAC, an assistant special agent in charge. And above that is an SAC, or a SAC, special agent in charge. The FBI hates, for some reason, when you call the SAC a SAC, even though every other agency calls them a SAC. And oftentimes they are SAC. But But yeah, so my ASAC, he's like the mid-level manager, and he told me one time, because I got to this point where I had COVID. And so I guess a little backstory is I'm unvaccinated. And I always say this, I don't care if you got it. I think a lot of people were duped. Right now we're seeing a lot of news coming out about people getting these blood clots in their leg. Like Lauren Boebert just had this happen. And I saw Cheryl Atkinson on Twitter talking about it, how she in just her personal life knows a number of other people who have had the same thing. And then someone I know in my life, their wife has had the same thing, a blood clot in their leg removed. And in all these cases, I don't know if they're vaccinated or not. It's none of my business if they don't want to share it. I know that most people got it right out of the gates. I was adamantly opposed to it. I ended up writing like a 16-page religious accommodation that to this day is still unaddressed by the FBI. And I think that is really what put me on the radar, because that's another common thread.
I think that's the longest one I've heard of too, just so you know.
Yeah. And legally, from a legal perspective, by no means does it have to be that long. But it was another one of these things where, like, I am not going to back down from this. I know you're going to try to attempt to deny my faith, but that faith is between me and God. And even the way our law is written, Title VII, it talks about that. It talks about how, like, it's individual. It's on an individual basis. And so I dove into all of this to write that accommodation. And I don't know how helpful it was to people, but I know it had been shared with many, many people. And I hope it was helpful, even though it seems in a lot of ways that fight is no longer part of the fight. But I still think it is. Like, we cannot memory hole what happened with all of that. But I think that is one of the things that early on put me on the radar. So fast forward a little bit, February of like 22. So in December of 21, we came back to Wisconsin for Christmas, which was our typical mode. Like every year we'd come back for Christmas, and we get COVID, and we go back to Kansas, and I'm about to go back to work on like January 3rd or something like that. But at the time, the rules were if you were unvaccinated, you had to take a COVID test. So I took it. It was positive. They said, stay home the rest of the week and take another one and let us know. The next week, it was still positive. So they said, stay home another week. And so I don't go back to the office until like mid-January, like 17th, 18th, something like that. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm not taking these tests anymore. And at the time, the FDA guideline was if you had COVID and recovered and were healthy, you did not have to take a test for 90 days. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to follow the FDA's guidelines, because the FBI claims that, or CDC, not FDA, CDC. The FBI claims that they are following the CDC guidelines. And so we had to put our test every week into this, we had to like basically self-report our test. I stopped doing it, and I don't hear anything for over 40 days. And then I get a call from somebody up in Kansas City, because I was down in Wichita. I get a call and they say, hey, we noticed you haven't been putting your tests in. It's been over 40 days. Are you gonna do that? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And she was like, oh, okay, well, you haven't been one of my problem people, so how come you're stopping? And I'm thinking in my head, like, I'm still not a problem person. Like, you are the problem, because you're a tyrant. You're a good German. You would have no problem driving the train to frickin' Dachau. But because I'm just doing my job. And so I'm like, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And she's like, okay, well, thank you for being honest with me. I'll call you back in a little bit. Of course, I don't ever hear from her, but I start hearing from my boss. He pulls me in, and, it escalates. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. Here's the CDC guideline. Here's the FBI saying we follow their guidelines. And so we're heading into a 3-day weekend over like MLK Day or something like that. And my ASAC, also unvaccinated, also claims Christ, calls me up. My family and I were driving down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, not very far from Wichita, because there's an awesome outdoor park there. And we were like, yeah, let's go do that. We got this 3-day weekend. So he calls me up, and he's like trying to convince me to just test. I'm testing. You have been testing. Just take the test. And he basically, again, he just twisted the truth and said, sometimes you have to do the difficult thing for your family, and to show them that you're willing to do the hard thing for them. Something like that. I actually have a direct quote, because I wrote it down or he texted it. It's in one of my Substack posts. But he was the one getting this wrong here, because especially as a dad, as a father, as a husband, as someone who says I'm seeking Christ. Yes, I don't get it right all the time. I sin every day. How can I look my daughters in the face and say, you do the right thing when I'm not willing to? You do the hard thing that is right when I'm not willing to. Because here again, we have the FBI violating its own rules and policies. And now you have supervisors trying to coerce someone into doing something that's wrong. At least in this instance, I know deep in his heart, this ASAC knows it was wrong. He knows it was wrong, but he complied anyways because he liked his position, his paycheck, or whatever. And it's like, man, for you to try to twist the truth and say, do the wrong thing because your family needs you to. No, my family needs me to be a leader, and they need to be able to look to me and say, man, dad does take a bold stand. Dad does do what's right, even when it's hard. And again, I don't always, because I'm sinful. I'm a fallen being. But for these people to twist the truth like that is straight from the depths of hell. And
and let me interject right here, because this is something that I struggled with probably a year or two, maybe even from the beginning. I just remember this one was hard for me, man. When we work together, when we get in those Bearcats, put on all that tack uniform, you have the mindset that, if I see my buddy going something, he doesn't see a threat, I'll jump in between my buddy and that threat.
right.
Like I'll lose my life if I have to protect my partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, at least that's the way I was working.
Right.
And verbally, that's kind of like what everybody says, man, I'd take a bullet for you, brother. I'd take a bullet. And then this all started happening. And it's like, you would lay your life down for me, you say, but in the reality, like, you won't even sacrifice a paycheck.
I know.
You won't risk an internal affairs investigation. You won't get disciplined, for me, and not for doing the wrong things. I'm saying these consequences of doing the right things. So would you really have died for me, bro?
Mm-hmm. Dude, it's such a. I remember shortly. It was pretty soon after I got suspended. I came on with you and Kyle. Can I mention your other show by name or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I came on Roll Call with you guys. I think it was Roll Call that I was
it was
on.
Roll Call. Yeah,
and we talked about this, and this is the same conclusion that I got to, man. Like, oh, you say you'll die for me, bro. You won't even send me a text message. Like, you're gonna die for me though? Like, okay, sure you will. Because I was on SWAT. I was on Kansas City SWAT for 2 years, and one dude, the day he found out I got suspended, called me. And honestly, I wasn't surprised, because I consider him my best friend in the FBI. We don't talk a lot these days. But whatever. But that's it. And then after I testified, then 2 other guys reached out, and I was surprised by then. But that's it. That's it.
And for the people that are listening, because I know there's people that they have soft hearts, but I want to make a comparison here. Chances are that our former colleagues and friends were probably told, you're being ordered, do not talk to Luna, do not talk to Garret. Like they probably were, but
Yep.
I'm going to tell
I know
everybody.
they were. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I have the proof that they were.
And I'm going to rewind the clock, couple years ago, maybe even close to 10 years ago, back when I was with my agency, there was a particular officer who was our friend. This was a guy that I loved and cared about. And they told us, you're ordered not to talk to this guy. It was an order. Like, if they were going to fire me for something, there's a couple other things they could have picked where I would have been like, well, damn it, you got me. Like, you got me on that one. And this was one of those situations, And the thing about it is, this guy was in a mental health crisis. And for people that know, in law enforcement, you kind of become this isolated family. It's just other people, it's a different lifestyle. So you kind of lose all these old connections and stuff. You'll see people from high school and church, and you'll talk to them, but it's like this core group of of people that you're family with. And so this guy's going through the hardest time in his life, where we know sometimes that results on people pointing the barrel at themselves.
That's right.
And now you're telling his best friends you can't talk to him. In essence, you can't help him. You can't be there for him. Out of all the people that were in our agency, there's one guy that reached out to him, and it was me. And that conversation started. And that conversation started with, "Listen, bro, you know I'll get in trouble for talking to you.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to leave you out to dry, man. So let's talk." And we talked and we fellowshipped, and I was there for him. But let me tell you what hurt. We were able to heal this guy and bring him back. And then I got the boot. And they were giving the orders, better not talk to him. And no one reached out, bro.
Nope. Dude.
No one reached out, including the one that I was willing to lose my career to help.
Right.
And
Dude,
it just shows you we're not all the same, man.
No, we aren't. We certainly aren't. And yeah, similarly coming to those conclusions, like, oh man, I had a misconception about what I thought we were as friends, as colleagues, as people allegedly in the thick of this law enforcement world together. Boy, was I wrong. You know, I think it might have been, I bet you, yeah, I guarantee you if something like this happened at my police department, it would have been more similar to what you just told me. But in some graciousness to them, when this all happened, when I got suspended and everything, the people, my former colleagues at the PD, by and large, have been awesome. At least definitely the ones I've kept in touch with, and even a few others who I didn't expect to hear from or didn't expect when I saw them, you know, because I actually went and visited once. Two of my best friends from the PD, they had an early morning deal one day, and they said, and we just said, yeah, let's meet up for coffee. And they're like, come check out the PD, you know, and because it has been remodeled like drastically since I worked there. And so I did, and I ended up staying there for a few hours and running into lots of former colleagues, and by and large, it was great. I think that would have been different had I been railroaded out of the PD. But for that, you know, having been railroaded out of the FBI, and to have them welcome me back and say, hey, we know you, we know we worked with you, we know how you were. But then also, and similarly to the FBI, what your supervisors at the PD did is a violation of the First Amendment, and they should be ashamed of themselves. Same at the FBI. So I know this for a fact because I have it. Congress has the receipt. My lawyers have the receipt. There was an email sent out that said to not talk to me about classified information because my security clearance had been suspended. It didn't say don't talk to him. It said don't talk to him about classified information. But then I find out later, because too, there were a couple other people who eventually, they knew it was wrong. So eventually, when they thought the dust might have settled a little bit, they reached out, and some of those people I'm still in touch with. And I was told that they were ordered, the SWAT team and my squad in Wichita were ordered not to talk to me. That's a First Amendment violation. And every single person that was ordered that could have come forward as a whistleblower. Guess how many did? 0. And same with you in your case. When supervisors in law enforcement, guess what? They're in the government. They cannot violate your constitutional rights. They cannot tell you to not associate. You have your First Amendment right includes the freedom of association. So you can go and freely speak to a colleague of yours who you are friends with, whether they got suspended, whether they're dealing with some mental health crisis. They cannot order you not to speak to them. And this is another greater part of the problem. And again, I think of Easter, we're just on the tail end of the Easter season. Right before or shortly before Christ is crucified, it's post Palm Sunday. It's in John 12. It talks about in like verse 42 and 43. It's like seared on my mind because of this Easter. It talks about how some even of the authorities believed, but for fear of the Pharisees, they basically stayed quiet because it says they loved the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. And boy, don't we see that in our quote unquote authorities as well, in police departments, in the FBI, and the government as a whole. Just do what I say. And a lot of them, I bet you, especially, maybe I'm wrong, but I bet that especially in the law enforcement world, they know this stuff is wrong, and they do it anyways. Do what I say because I'm in charge. I'm the sergeant. I'm the lieutenant. I'm the captain. I'm the SSA. I'm the ASAC. I'm the SAC. I'm the director. I'm the chief. I'm in charge. No, you're not. No, you are not. And for you to violate somebody's constitutional rights like that and say, we're going to fire you if you exercise your rights. Our government is wicked, dude. And it's at every level. I know it's at every level.
You know, it's, I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying. You know, I worked with a lot of these men and some of them women. I'm not talking about weak people.
Right.
I'm talking about, you know, some of them on the SWAT team, some of them on our gang team, some of them on our narc teams. Like, you know, people that are, you know, I'll go and I'll fight, you know, I'll fight by myself if I have to. Some of these guys have been in shootings. Like these weren't weak people. These were people that they're good fathers. They're good husbands. You know, they're smart people. But where I call them out, I do it with love, because I would still jump in front of a bullet for all of them, even though we haven't talked in 3 years. What I'm trying to get them to realize, and it's a call out, is as strong as you are, you're still not as strong as you thought.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you still took a knee to the hardest fight. And when I started to see, because people would send me photos and I would see people from my agency, including a chief who I think is one of the best chiefs I ever worked for. And they were kneeling and doing the fists for the BLM. And I was like, what? I know these men. They don't agree with that. And we've spent so many hours and days and months and years together. They don't agree with it, but why are they doing it?
Right.
And it's for everything that you just articulated. And, you know, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, I think yesterday or the day before. Crazy how it lines up. And he's kind of frustrated with law enforcement. And, you know, he was talking about, you know, the pay, law enforcement pay, you know, in California, you know, as a detective, I was making good money, you know, good benefits. It was a good life.
Yeah. Same as an FBI agent. It was good. It's the best I've had, you know, from a worldly perspective.
For a guy with just a high school diploma and some college credits, and then, you know, what I got from the Marine Corps. Yeah, it was a great job. And he was like, you know, I just, you know, it started off with firefighters, because firefighters make a lot of money too. And he's just like, you know, but retiring at 110% or 105%. I know the live chat's going to go crazy right now. Oh, hell yeah, I agree with them. Hear me out here. Also, look at the lifespan of first responders after they retire.
Right.
It's actually, unfortunately, it's really short, you guys.
Very, yep.
You know, I know guys that retired and within 3 years they're dead.
Right. Me too.
You know, and a lot of them is, and this is speculation, I have no science behind it, it's just anecdotal to me, but I think a lot of it is because a lot of them just, that's the only thing they identified as.
Agreed. And
You
yeah,
know,
same. I don't have the data, but yeah, dude. I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
you know,
it's such a common thread.
It wasn't like their faith wasn't their identity, their role in their family wasn't their identity. It was the badge, it was the job, the career. And once that was taken from them, I mean, that it'll destroy a person if you have nothing else to fall back on.
Right.
But what I was telling them is, we get paid those big bucks because, and you were a street cop, so you know this part. I don't know how it would work in the feds, but as a street cop, you know, 80% of the time you're a secretary with a gun. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you are, you know. But for that 20%, that's why the public pays us what they pay us, because that 20% that nobody else is ever going to go and do, you're going to do it. And not only are you going to do it, but you have to do it to perfection.
Right.
That's the time where you can't make mistakes, because people's lives depend on it. Whether it's, you know, going into a gunfight, whether it's, you know, putting yourself between an abusive husband and a wife, or, you know, doing the crazy things to get a, you know, kid that's being kidnapped. I mean, you could lay out all the crazy stories that from time to time we hear and they surface. That's what you're getting paid for. And what I was telling them is, law enforcement needs to raise the bar of who they hire. You know, it's obviously the physical strength needs to be something that's there. We shouldn't be having obese cops,
right?
You know, and we shouldn't be having anorexic cops. Like, who's gonna, you know, what victim's gonna have confidence, and what evildoer is gonna feel threatened by that situation? And so there's a physical attribute that needs to be there. But with that pay, we need to make it so hard that we also need people that are also smart, that also have common sense, that also have life experience. It needs to be one of the hardest jobs to get,
Yeah.
beyond just the background. Like, even once you make it past there, it just needs to be that hard. And he goes, well, then there wouldn't be that many cops. And I'm like, well, if we also raise the pay, it would attract the best of the best. It's kind of like the NFL. We know there's great athletes everywhere, but only like the best of the best, and then the best of those make it to the NFL, which has broken my heart with all the stuff that they've gone into.
I know, right? Me too.
Why would we not have that kind of threshold for the people that are supposed to protect us, uphold our laws, and then take on the worst of the worst? But I think there's all these politics that gone in. And here's the other thing. Look at guys like you and Kyle and Steve and all these other ones. You're the ones that need to be there to train the new breed. But what happens when you remove the Garrets and the Kyles and all that? All of a sudden, it's the yesers that are left. It's the ones, like we said all the way towards the beginning of the show, the ones that are willing to toe the line,
right?
That are now training guys that are coming in, good men and women that have the right intentions. And when they're trained this way, they're like, well, maybe this is the way it is then. And you start to cloud what's right and what's wrong, because, well, if this is how they're training us, what do you think on that, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, we've probably talked about it, and I'm sure you've heard Kyle and Steve mention it too. The Holocaust Memorial Museum trip that every new FBI employee makes, it's mandatory. The director speaks to you at the end, and the whole point is to not forget what humans are capable of by looking at history. And guess what? We are marching down that same path. And I know people say, oh man, you're invoking the Nazi argument, and that's kind of hyperbolic, don't you think? No, I don't, actually, because if you actually look back at the history in law enforcement alone in Bavaria, pre-World War II, 1932 is when Hitler took power. And I say took because he did. He took it. Okay, quote unquote, yeah, he's elected, whatever, but he basically took the power from the chancellor. And anyways, I don't need to do a whole history lesson of that, but in 1932, it started to be mandatory you had to be a member of the Nazi party to be in law enforcement in Bavaria. By 1933, it certainly was mandatory. And now you got all these cops. Man, I got 10 years to go. I got a family to feed. I'm not really a Nazi, but I mean, they told me I got to be a Nazi to keep my job. So whatever, I'll sign on. And then fast forward to 1942, you got Reserve Police Battalion 101 executing men, women, and children in Poland. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, methodically, like this. Removing the people like me, Kyle, and Steve, and you. Removing the people who say, hey, that's actually wrong. I'm not going to do that. And actually, I'm going to push back on you pretty hard for it. Take them away. Because this is another thing you mentioned about raising up and training up the new agents or the new cops or whatever. One of my other hats I wore as an FBI agent was as a training agent. I had a trainee, from the academy. She had been an analyst beforehand for the FBI, and then she became an agent. And yeah, now you're going to get brown shirts, literal brown shirts. And I remember, actually, before I got suspended, telling my squad the only reason I'm sticking around is so they don't fill my seat with an actual brown shirt. And I meant it then. And that was before, I mean, I didn't see the suspension coming. That was like during like COVID stuff. Because like I saw most of them, they didn't want to get the shot. They didn't, but like, what am I supposed to do? And it's like, well, you do the right thing. Yes, it can, like it can be hard, but you have to, you must. And yeah, now it's, I mean, just dude, you've seen it, I'm sure. But for the people listening and watching, like, just go on the FBI's Twitter and see FBI jobs. It's at FBI jobs. Go on FBI jobs and look at what they're doing, who they're recruiting, who they're seeking. They want to purge anybody who says, hey, you know what? This actually seems kind of evil. They're going to LGBTQ plus parades and whatnot and setting up booths to hire people. I just saw a video the other day. They were at like a Comic-Con type event. And it's like, what are we doing, man? What are we doing? You're going to recruit the kid who's jerking off in his mom's basement and playing Fortnite until 4 a.m. and not the SF veteran or Navy SEAL from who went to Afghanistan. Like, what's going on here?
Yep.
And honestly, like, I think it's intentional. It's a continued intentional destruction of the moral fabric of our society. When you have the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world completely morally bankrupt, I mean, what else do you need? What else do you need to just turn the country around?
Well, and I agree with you. I don't think this is accidental. I don't think this is negligence. I think this is intentional, 100%. And if you can completely erode the trust of the community and its law enforcement, then all of a sudden you get crazy people like Klaus Schwab,
Yep.
that start talking to our government and be like, well, this is the time you should put robotic law enforcement.
You
Right?
will own nothing and be happy.
Exactly, right?
And think of that. It's a great example. Christopher Wray went to the World Economic Forum last year on the FBI jet with his entourage of a protection detail and clerical assistants and all this. Why are we paying for Christopher Wray or anybody from a domestic agency in the US to go to the World Economic Forum?
Well, it's why I bring it up. You don't send Christopher Wray and think that him and Klaus Schwab ain't gonna have a conversation. Like, come on, you guys.
Right.
He's from the law enforcement standpoint, other nations know the power that comes with Christopher Wray.
Yep.
Like, and listen, I know it sounds conspiracy, but Klaus Schwab, for those that don't know, he's the main guy in the World Economic Forum. But his advisor is a guy by the name of Yuval Noah Harari. Just go look at videos of what this guy says. He says there's no such thing as God. He says that we can manipulate genes. He says we're building an ark and it's not for everybody. Like, this ain't alpha. Like, trust me, I love the fringe stuff. You guys know I do. But this is him publicly saying it on interviews. And this is the guy that's advising Klaus Schwab, who's the guy that Christopher Wray flew out to go be a part of the World Economic Forum. Like, if that don't terrify you guys,
I know.
like man, like you're hearing me, but you ain't listening. Like, that's what's going on. I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I feel you on this, man. And I know it has to probably weigh on you sometimes, if maybe even all the time. But it's when you have the bad people that are like, well, just do this and just do that. And in my circumstance, and I'll use it because, it's my father and I know he loves me. But sometimes you get the good people, the people that care about you, and it goes back to that conversation earlier when you were like, what are you doing? You feed your family. How's your family? And I remember early on in this fight, definitely within the first year, maybe first couple months, when the FBI and DOJ came after me. And my father was like, well, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, the first hearing's done. They offered this plea. And he's just like, well, you taking it? Like, are you crazy, old man? Like, no, I'm not going to do this. And then, a couple of times more, as this thing progressed, he's like, listen, your little girl, like, he hit me in the heartstrings, man, because what he was saying wasn't wrong, but I'll get to the point I'm trying to make. Your little girls need their dad. They got to have their dad there. Even your teenage kids, who's going to take care of your house? Who's going to pay the rent? Like, just the plea. So it goes away. Like, if you take the plea, you don't go to jail. It's all over. And my dad's come around. He understands now that's why I'm okay with sharing, where it came from. Because this is my father. I know he loves me. Like, I know my father loves me.
Right.
But it reminded me of the story of Jesus when he's in the desert. Right. And you can correct the story because you're probably better versed than me than this. But you can imagine he's probably thirsty. He's probably hungry. It's probably hot.
Yeah.
Right. He's probably got blisters. He's probably stepped on a few thorns. Things probably ain't going right walking in the desert. And the devil, takes him to the highest mountain, and just like, look at all these kingdoms. Like, and it just, I felt like it was that. I'm not calling my dad the devil, you guys. What I'm saying is the analogy of, if you do this, if you just submit to evil, everything gets good. The pain goes away. But the way I am, and I'm sure the way you are, and I'll turn it over to you here, is you're probably right. The easiest thing to do is probably that. But two things that I know is then my partner that died, that burned alive in front of me, for me that's in vain.
Mm-hmm.
All the birthdays and Christmases that I missed in my career to protect that oath were for nothing. My kids sacrificed for nothing. That when I went overseas, the things that I did and the things that were done to me were for nothing. That if I just hand over, my morals and character to evil, then everything in my life was in vain. Everything was fake. And like you said, how can I tell my precious little ones to stand when it's hard, when I bowed to it? And then the second reason is I know me. And I'm a movie guy. I love movies. I get attached to the characters in movies. It's why I enjoy them so much. But there's a movie out there with called Braveheart, Mel
Oh
Gibson.
yeah. Yes.
And there's a part in that movie where he says, yeah, you might die today. But do you want to be imagine being the old man on the bed dying. And would you not trade all those years to know that you did the right thing when you're supposed to? And that's the way I see this. There's been some times, Garrett, where I've failed God a lot, and I've broken a lot of promises, man.
Yeah, for sure.
But
We're
there's
falling.
we're falling. But there's also been some times where he's made it very clear, this is a fight you're gonna go through.
Right.
This fight's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the verse, and you said it so perfectly. When Isaiah's there and he's like, man,
Nobody.
all right, well, send me. You can say send me in your heart, not wanting to go, everybody.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll turn it over to you, man.
Yeah. So, dude, I mean, it's interesting how similar these things are. So, one, your dad, it reminds me of what you said about my lawyers. He is looking at you as his son on earth and wants you to be able to make it through here. And he's not thinking about some of these other factors. And we're gracious for that, because as fathers, we get that. I don't want my youngest to stand up on the chair and then take a step and fall off, because I know that would hurt her. And I will prevent that if I can. But also, especially as adult children, we don't always, or at least the people around us, our parents or whatever, they also aren't looking at the bigger, broader picture, because they're hyper focused on taking care of their child. We're still their child. Yeah, we're adults. We're still their child. And so it reminds me of that. But then the next piece that you brought up is Jesus in the desert. And again, I'll get into it probably more in the future, but this story is a very poignant example for me right now. So Jesus is in the desert. He goes up into the desert, into the mountains, shortly after he gets baptized by John the Baptist to fast and pray, to commune with God. And at the end of that, the Bible tells us that Jesus was hungry. Well, of course, he just fasted for 40 days. And like you said, he's probably thirsty too, because he was probably foraging for water during that time. Or maybe he didn't even drink any. I don't know. And the Bible isn't clear on that. But then Satan comes at his weakest moment to tempt him. And one of those temptations, like you said, he takes him up on the highest mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, these I will give to you if you bow down to me. Satan knows the power he has on this earth. And the Bible is very clear over and over again about Satan being the ruler of this world. Satan knows that power, so much so, and still filled with that pride and hubris, which is why he was cast out of heaven in the first place, to come to Jesus, God incarnate in the flesh as man, and say, I will give you these. So he knows the power he has. He knows that he's manipulating and using the World Economic Forum for his devices on this fallen world. But then Jesus, of course, overcomes the temptation and rebukes Satan every time. Out of the 3 temptations Satan tried, Christ used God's word. He used the Bible to rebuke Satan. Man does not live by bread alone. And, some of the other ones I'm not remembering off the top of my head. And then back into Isaiah 6:8 again. Here am I, send me. And actually, one other thing, I pulled this up while you're talking. Psalm 37:27-29. Turn away from evil and do good. So shall you dwell forever. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever. We have a holy, eternal hope. We know that God's justice will prevail in the end. Does that mean we're going to see it on earth? No, maybe not. Most likely not. Because of these fallen systems we've been talking about, these fallen institutions, and these fallen beings like us, these people who bend the knee are fallen and they give in. And look at me too. There are times I can point to in my life where I'm like, man, I didn't do the right thing there. I gave in to my own cowardice. But I also believe that in God's sovereignty, he uses those things to bring us to this point, to prepare us for the battle. And we knew, you knew, I knew, Kyle knew, we knew this was the hill. And some of these people, like the family friend I mentioned earlier, or your dad, they don't understand that path that we're on. And in some ways, yes, we must be gracious and loving with them, and hopefully help them to see some of this truth and see why. The Bible talks about a remnant very often. It talks about a remnant of believers who were left. And in a similar way, I think that's kind of like us. We're like a remnant where we're like, hey, we swore this oath. It meant something. And we can't just throw it away. And man, the things you were saying about the time you spent in the Marine Corps, the time you spent as a police officer, with the horrible things with OISs and your partner and all that, and similar to me, deployments and as a cop and then now as an FBI agent, I don't want to throw them away, but I'm starting to see why God took them. Like he had us on this path to bring us to this point where he said, okay, what are you going to choose? Are you going to keep choosing the career? I thought my life was dedicated to service in this way. Military, police, law enforcement, FBI. That's what I thought. I thought that's what God designated me for. And he did for a time. And same for you. He did for a time. And now this is the next phase. It doesn't mean we don't have to mourn the loss of what we thought our life was or what it was going to be. But it also means that we must lean forward into the truth even more. And come what may, go ahead, put us in the fiery furnace. We won't bend the knee to you, evil king, when you go against God, when you go against truth, when you go against the Constitution, when you go against our own laws, our own standards, when you retaliate. We won't. We can't. And that is what I hope my daughters can see someday, what I hope your children and Kyle and Steve's and all the people we've connected with, and hopefully even people listening and in the chat. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not any more courageous. I didn't get to pick the hill. The hill picked me. We just have to obey.
Speaking of next phase, and I want to get into the updates as we wrap it up here, and make sure people know how to get to you and help you out. But one thing I do want to share, and I think it is important, because sometimes, and I know I was guilty of it, I'd be watching a talk show or a documentary or listening to something on the radio, and you hear a person's story, and you're like, "Dang, man, they were so strong, man! Like they just conquered that, man. They faced the government, or whoever it may be, Mandela, Martin Luther King, like, man." But I want people to realize, maybe even through our small examples, we feel what you feel, like, and I would imagine that Martin Luther King had nights where, he's in the shower and the dude was probably in tears, like, man, this is a heavy cross. Like, this is hard. Like, they're coming after my family. But, doing the right thing is doing the right thing. And I say that to say this: when at the very peak of all this, when it all started happening, I was still fighting my agency. And then I had this new thing, and I had just won. I was like, man, I'm going to be a cop again in a few months. gonna get a check that I got 2 commas in it. Like I was pretty stoked. And then of course, sinister things would be sinister things. And welcome to the FBI into Alpha's
Right.
life. And I remember how I felt in solitary confinement. And I remember a few days after that, the thought was there. I can't afford both these battles. I can't afford the battle against the FBI for my freedom and still fight to cover what's going to cost to go to this writs appeals. Like, this sucks,
Yep.
And I remember I got on my knees, man. And I told God, I go, listen, and I don't know if I've ever shared this publicly. But I said, since 5 years old, I've wanted to be a cop. My mom had this book. Every year you document it. And with the exception of the year that the movie Top Gun came out, because I wanted to be a fighter pilot, it's always been police. Like, this is something I want to do from childhood all the way. And this story probably resonates with so many first responders. There were choices in high school where friends went to go do things and I didn't do it because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go be a Marine. And after that, I wanted to be a cop. Like, I knew this is where I was going to go and I had to protect that, including, those certain tattoos I didn't get because I didn't want to do anything that was going to jeopardize my ability to wear a badge on my chest. And I addressed my career that way. That's why it was so successful. It wasn't just, I loved it. It wasn't what I identified as, but I loved it. And so when it all got taken away and I'm on my knees and I said, listen, God, this one hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And because you can't lie to Jesus, right? You can't lie to God.
Even if you try, he knows. He knows the heart, like you said earlier.
So I come with the approach where when I disagree, I tell him I disagree, and I told him, I don't agree with you on this. I'm doing good. Like, I saved a kid's life a few years ago. If I wasn't a cop, that kid drowns.
Right.
And so I told him, where my path goes. And if it's to be a cop, there's no one that can get in the way with that. No one can stop that. Not the FBI, not the president, not my old agency, no courtroom. If that's the path you have for me, then I'll be a cop. But I told him, with the way things are looking, I think you've chosen another path. And I said, and this one hurts, bro. I feel it here, even talking about this. I said, but I will submit to this new path you have for me. And all I ask is just one thing, because you know how much this hurts, that if my path is a different direction, then just give me peace with it. If leaving this behind is what it's supposed to be, then just put peace in my heart. And you know what? I've been able to have peace in my heart that if my career wearing a badge is done, then it's done. Because if you would have looked, I mean, the track I was in, I would already be a sergeant right now.
Yeah.
And if you would have told me, hey, if you rewind the clock back to January of 2019, you would have said, you're just not going to be a cop no more, bro. I would have been crushed, right?
Yep.
But it goes to what you're saying is the hill was chosen. And if you're going to say you have faith, even as a sinner, if you're going to say you have faith, then you got to pull the trigger on your faith when the hill's there.
Right.
And with that, I'll give it to you for your thoughts on that, and then transition into where you are, what's going on, and what kind of persecutions have they been doing, man? Because I've seen some screenshots on social media that I'm like, this is crazy.
I know, it's nuts. But yeah, what you said, this is the part that resonated with me the most. You submitted. You submitted to God, to his authority. That's what he was seeking. That's what he wanted. Look, I'm not saying I know everything about God. I look at God as this master mathematician. Nobody could ever understand the algorithm that he is running. And a little piece of it, though, was just submitting and saying, I'll bear this cup. I'll bear this cup if I must. But it's like Jesus again in the garden. I mean, I hope this is relevant for people because we are just on the tail end of Easter here. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, take this cup from me, Father. Take it. He doesn't want it. He knows what he's up against, where he is headed. He knows where he's headed, right to the cross. these things in our life happen to take us to the foot of the cross. And that's just a little piece. There's a lot more at play in the algorithm for you and for me and how they've crossed and for people listening and watching. And we cannot comprehend. We cannot comprehend it. But that submission to his authority and his will is part of what he is seeking from us. And similarly, and for now at least, I've not been in solitary confinement. I don't hold my breath on that. But because who knows what they'll try. The same type of evils that they've used against you. They may try them on me too. And if that comes, it comes. And I know that whatever comes is by God's sovereign hand, as difficult as that can be sometimes. But similarly, as I mourn losing the career that I loved it, man. Like I love being a cop. I love being an infantryman. I love being a cop. I love being an FBI agent. I love being FBI SWAT. I was very excited about the new unit I was headed to. I'm pretty sure I would have loved that as well. And it was taken. And that's fine. I don't know where it will go because, like I said, I'm technically still an FBI employee. But who knows? You're in this for 3.5 years now. In August, my attorney said, "Can you do it for 3 more years?" And I thought, I don't know. But I do know we must continue the fight. And also, I think of Mark Houck. He was he's running for Congress now. I think in Pennsylvania. Pro-life, very, very, very pro-life guy, Catholic, and he was arrested by the FBI. And similar story to you. While he's there in their holding cell, he's praying. He's praying to God. Kyle has had him on a couple times. I remember hearing that. I think the first time he had him on. And he was arrested for a FACE Act violation, which, man, that's probably a topic for another day to get into the weeds on that and what he did and didn't do and wasn't arrested locally and other examples of FACE Act, even recently in the news, even just this past weekend in New York. But anyways, I digress. But I also think of Job, and sometimes I kind of, I get a little bit bashful about it because who am I to compare myself to Job? But I think the example of Job obviously is included in God's word for a reason, for us to look at this immense suffering. And look, I know there's some Christian in Russia or China in some underground prison somewhere who's had their family killed. If they heard this, they'd say, "Guys, your persecution is not really that bad." But
Suck it up, dude.
yeah. But in the West, in America, as far as it goes, like I think we've got some pretty stark examples. I hope that's not too prideful, but I read Job or was in Job a fair amount shortly after I got suspended. And then just this past summer, it took us most of summer and into winter to finish. But at our small group Bible study, we were going through the book of Job. And the last couple months, even though we've been done with it for a while, even longer than this, but the last couple months, Job 42:2 has been on my mind a lot lately. And it says, I know, so this is Job when he kind of comes full circle and realizes like he needs to submit to God. And he does, and he repents. And he says to God, "I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." And it goes exactly to what you were saying. When you had your own Job moment here in solitary, submitting to God and saying, "Lord, I don't know why you're doing this. Take this cup from me if you can. That's what I'm asking you to do. That's what I want. But if you don't, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I know that I can be an FBI agent again. I know that you can be a cop again if it's God's divine sovereign will." We also know if it isn't, we march forward. It's okay to mourn that loss, but we continue to march forward in the truth. And maybe you won't be the real police again. And maybe I won't be the fake police, FBI again. Because they certainly are not the real police. That's what I refer to all real police, like I used to be. You guys are the real police. And maybe that won't ever come to pass for us. But what might come to pass is continuing to move forward and quote unquote police in a different way, like this, with our voice, with the message, with, finding kindred spirits like this and moving forward. And yeah, I don't know, man, just thanks for having me on, dude, because this has filled my cup, dude. Like for real. It has filled my cup because it's like, oh yeah, I'm not alone in this. There are others. There are people listening, watching, others like you that we're connected with who get it, who understand, who see the need for this, even if we aren't wearing a badge anymore. And that might happen. It may not. It may. Like, we don't know right now.
When you said earlier in the show, all these people like Sonya and everybody just being brought together, and you look at it, and it stretches beyond the United States. Everybody, you see these connections of, quote unquote, patriots, right? One thing that I've changed, Garrett, I used to identify the word patriot with Americans. Now I look at the word patriot as a global word. There are patriots in this entire world, and we're all the same.
Mhm.
We want freedoms and liberties. Leave our family alone and let us worship our God.
Yep, dude.
You know,
So
that's
even this, man, Alpha, even this is actually so poignant because, and again, I'm just going to say it's sovereign. This is sovereign. So about 2 weeks ago, I listened to this sermon. There's this church in Arizona called Apologia, and they have a podcast and stuff at Apologia Studios. And the lead pastor there is a guy named Jeff Durbin, but they had a guest pastor. And early on in the COVID fight, this church, they represented some Navy SEALs, and that's kind of how I first learned of them. And I've been following along. They're kind of in my rotation. Well, a couple weeks ago, this sermon popped up. It's called the belligerent manliness of Jesus, or the belligerent manliness of Christ, something like that. And this guest speaker was this guy from Germany who's a pastor in Germany. And like you just said, it extends borders, like there's no border here. It goes back to our sojourning and being a pilgrim on earth. And also, in other places, the Bible says there's neither Greek nor Jew. Like, we're all one according to God. Like, I understand countries and borders and boundaries and stuff, but in this particular mode and method of patriots, like you said, it is global, because like we talked about with Jesus and Satan showing Jesus the kingdoms of the world, somehow he was able, the Bible tells us he showed him all the kingdoms of the world. That had to have been some type of satanic deception to show him all of them. Because you go up on top of a mountain, you can't see all the kingdoms of the world. So in this spiritual battle, like, yes, there's no boundary here. There's no border. We're all one in Christ. And hallelujah to that as well, because we don't need this type of division between race and creed and this or that, because we are all one under Christ. But yeah, man, dude, I'm just really grateful to be here, and I appreciate you having me on. And it's interesting just looking back on the conversation we had, how many parts of it, it's like, oh man, it's so connected. It's so connected. Like, we haven't talked in a while, and then you bring me on, and it just is, it's like a brother, like you could just jump right back in, and you have these connections.
Like, we didn't skip a beat, bro.
Yeah, man. So yeah.
And the cool thing is I know that in the audience, there are parts of our stories, individually or collaboratively, that people are like, man, I've gone through that. And there's this connection. And for some people, our stories in this conversation, this warrior conversation, a warrior call, I might even call the episode that, man, because I really feel like it was a great conversation. That for some people, it's going to be vindication. For other people, it's going to be hope, because they're at the beginning of that fight. But, it's just one of the things that I've always said, is I don't script my shows. People that know, every now and then there's a topic that I'm not well versed in, so I'll study it. I'll have a list of a couple questions I want to make sure I ask. But I just, if God put me here, then hey, man, you make it happen. Like, let the show flow how you want it to flow.
Right.
And this is a perfect example of that. And I enjoyed the conversation too, man. So real quick, what's the latest thing that they've done to you? How can people find you, and how can people help you?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me at GOB Actual. I'm most active on Twitter, or X. I call it Twitter still, probably always will. But I'm also on Instagram and Truth, and probably a few other places, but mostly Twitter. And some ways you can help: you can subscribe to my Substack. It's free. But if you want to be a paid subscriber, by all means, it's lastline.substack.com, or you can go to suspendables, or the-suspendables.com, and you can get some suspendable swag. This one on the back, it has a suspendable or die flag, but we got a couple different options out there. And then the ACLJ is also representing me, so you can go to the ACLJ website. It's Jay Sekulo's nonprofit. And so our brief, because let's see, in March, my case was basically accepted by the DC circuit. The FBI they motioned to dismiss a 3-judge panel in the DC circuit, of all places. They said, no, there's more here. There's merits here that we need to hear. And so our brief on the merits is due this week. Actually, I think it's already been submitted. But so we'll see how that goes. So you can go to any of those things to help support. But most importantly, I ask that you pray for me, that you pray for my family, that you pray for my attorneys, that you pray for this fight, and that you pray for this nation and its leaders. Even we're commanded to do that as well, to pray for our leaders. But even if they are satanic and evil, because what a testament that would be if some of them started turning around into the truth. But yeah, then latest, we found out recently too, thanks to Kyle, he ran a credit report of himself and sent it to me and Steve, and said, hey, look, FBI's running my credit. So then Steve and I check ours. Sure enough, our credit has also been ran. For me, it came one of the days was interesting. It was August 2nd of 2022. So I'm about to head into this, I'm in the middle of this transfer at the time. We're just about to sell our house. So I'm kind of curious as to why they did that. My suspicion is that they were already knee deep into their fraud investigation into me, fraudulent investigation, where they've already determined I didn't do what they claimed I did. But here I sit still suspended. And then they ran my credit again on September 9th of 2022. And I was suspended on September 26th of 2022. And then they ran my credit again on October 10th of 2023. And I had already been suspended for over a year, 13 months at that point. So we're kind of curious as to what's going on there. But thankfully, we've all just blasted that out on Twitter. Dan Bongino mentioned it recently as well. And my attorneys have it. And it's like, who knows where we go from here. And then just prior to that, I had to pay a bill to the FBI, $3,400, even though they're not paying me, because like the latest whistleblower who came out about my case said, they've tried to financially devastate them. Well, they continue to try to do that. And so they claimed I had to pay this bill because they packed up all of our household goods. They paid a truck driver to transport everything to Virginia, where then they held it in perpetuity for about 2 months, not letting me get it. Eventually, I was finally allowed to get my own things, but they said I had to pay this bill for that. And then they said, if I didn't pay it by March 27th, that I would incur an additional 30% fee. And they keep trying to stick it to me, even though they know they're wrong, which that goes back to really a lot of the conversation we just had is these people, they know they're wrong, but they continue to just do what they're told, because they fear man.
They absolutely do. And I'll tell you, we'll close on this. You want to know why they're so frustrated? This is what I imagine, because crooked people don't understand good people. Crooked people think everybody's crooked. It's how they kind of justify things in their mind. Well, nobody's truly good, And so it's like, we're going to check their credit report because they're doing something here. Or we're going to let's check their bank accounts because we know there's money coming in from somewhere.
Right.
And every time they come up empty, it's just like, because they're good people. For those of you in the FBI, because I know you're going to watch this podcast, because what can we get Garret on? What can we take out of context? Nothing.
Right.
But that thing that resonated in you guys, that felt uncomfortable, that was God. I suggest you listen. Garrett's been an absolute phenomenal conversation, brother. I enjoyed it. Can't wait to have you back again. For the audience, all the links, everything that Garret just talked about, that'll be down in the description. So if you're driving, don't worry. Once you get somewhere and you park, just go down there, click it, then you can help my brother out, Garret. Any final word as we say goodbye, brother?
One last thing. Proverbs 28:5. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to seek the Lord. And like you just said, they don't get it. They don't. But their heartstrings are getting pulled too, because God has planted the seed in all of us, even for those who refuse to believe. So thanks for having me on. It's been awesome. It's been a great conversation. Honestly, at this point, I've not done as many of these as you or Kyle or anything, but it's been one of my favorite ones. So I appreciate you having me back.
Absolutely. And you and Steve are doing something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, me and Steve, we started doing our own podcast. We call it the American Radicals Podcast. You can find that at AmRadPod, AMRADPOD, at AmRadPod on Rumble, and then we post, to most of the podcast platforms after that, and we do 8:30 Eastern on Tuesday and Thursday, and 12 noon on Saturday, and then that's also at AmRadPod on Twitter and Truth.
Another gentleman you guys want to hear from? It's been an honor, brother. I had a blast too. You guys, we didn't interrupt with the commercial because I was just enjoying the conversation. So do me a solid, stick around for the last 2 minutes. Support the people that support this show because they keep food in my fridge and a roof above my head. God bless, Semper Fi. I'll catch you guys next time.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?
I'm excited to announce we're having a huge MyPillow spring sale. And here's a few examples. Buy one of our MyPillow 2.0s, you get another MyPillow 2.0 absolutely free. Made with cooling technology, the best pillow ever just got even better. And this just in, 9 brand new colors and styles of our Percale bed sheets. They're made with the finest long staple cotton, and now you can save 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98. And for the first time this year, I'm bringing you our My Slippers and Sandals for as low as $25 a pair. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get your MyPillow 2.0s. Buy one, get one free. Percale sheets as low as $24.98. My Slippers and Sandals as low as $25 a pair. And for a limited time, when you order $75 or more, your entire order ships absolutely free.